Transgender is being born biologically either female or male and then identifying gender-wise as a man or a woman. So being born male but identifying as a woman would be an example of being transgender.
Transgender is actually an umbrella term to cover a lot of different identities. Some people identify as transgender, transsexual, genderqueer. There are several different identities that fall under that, but generally it refers to somebody feeling that the biological sex they were defined or given at birth does not match their gender identity or their gender expression. So it's an umbrella term, but can also be used as an individual identity. It's all up to whoever's choosing to label themselves.
I think social justice is standing up for people who are not always stood up for in society. So social justice to me would be looking out for whether it be transgender people or whether it be people of a different race, people who are not in the majority.
I think that social justice is developing a framework that looks at all societal issues through the lens of how people are being treated and what the impact is on different people. Social justice to me does not mean treating everybody equally. It means looking at the systems in place to see what their impact is on different people and how we can make it more just.
I don't really think there is much social justice for people who are transgender. Just seeing with the students that I have, I know that there are constant microaggressions that happen for kids who are transgender, whether it be not, having a locker in the locker room or being called she or he on a constant basis when identifying as the other.
So I think that as far as schools goes, in every school district and every school and every specific classroom is different. But the problem with schools for transgender students is that they're created with this idea in mind that all students are cisgender until proven otherwise. Cisgender means that someone's gender identity matches up with the biological sex that they were given at birth. So I would say that there is not a lot of social justice in most schools for students who are transgender because even when they are accepted, even when they aren't bullied to the point of having to leave the school, they still have to seek out accommodations in order to have their basic needs met. If schools don't have gender-neutral, gender-inclusive bathrooms readily available, if students have to constantly gender themselves on forms, then that is not a good environment for a student who is transgender. I would argue it's not a good environment for any student, but the issue is that all students are created with this normative already in place. Students are not transgender until proven otherwise. Students are straight until proven otherwise. So I would say that until we shift that, we can never truly achieve a social justice environment for any student, including trans students.
I think what frustrates me is the lack of understanding, that people don't seem to understand what it's like to be transgender or to be different. And oftentimes, even when you tell an educator, they can't seem to get it right. Like, it's so difficult to say he pronouns. And especially with a student that I work with, what's difficult for him is when there's a sub and people are seeing on the attendance a girl's name, but he identifies as a he and has changed his name. So teachers don't realize that those little things add up during the day, and they don't think about, oh, maybe I should write that down on my sub plans. Just those little things, and that's frustrating.
I think that creating just environments and ideal environments for transgender students really starts with staff education. Students need staff and adults who are able to understand their needs, who are able to, be able to listen and to educate other students and staff. So I think the first thing that administrations can do is make sure that all staff are on board. You can't change minds necessarily, but making sure that at least all staff have the understanding that it is their job to protect students, and that is a requirement, that is what is going to be expected of staff in a school. Then I think as far as making a safe environment for trans students, you're looking at these different privileges that you have if you're not trans. So does everybody here have a safe bathroom that they can use? How many times do students have to gender themselves? An ideal environment would be looking very critically at those and changing them so that if a trans student came to the school, regardless of whether or not they asked for help, there would be these things already in place that would make it a safe environment. So bathrooms, forms that can have, forms don't always just have to say male, female. Adding a transgender box or just having gender be a fill-in on the blank on forms is another great option where you can just so easily make a change, and that can mean a lot to a student who may be struggling in school.
The ideal world for me would be everyone would be aware of transgender issues. There would be a bathroom that would be for either sex that they could go into, or at least if it wasn't, a bathroom with all the stalls, at least it would be a single stall in every school that was accessible to kids who are transgender. And then for teachers to be aware of it so that they would update their attendance list, they would use the right pronouns for the student. They wouldn't segregate based on female and male because so often not everyone fits into that box. I think transgender inclusion has a long way to go because already I feel like the lesbian, gay, bisexual community has not really had a lot of strides. I mean, there's been strides towards changing people's opinions, and that's one thing, but transgender is completely separate, even though it is lumped in with LGBT issues, because not only is someone struggling with their gender identity, they're also struggling with their sexuality oftentimes too, because they may be straight or they may be gay within the transgender community. So I think people have a hard time grasping what that actually means to be transgender, and I think human beings tend to put things into boxes, and when things don't quite fit in a box, it's really hard for people to understand.
I think that schools in general are pretty far away from creating a just environment, but I will say that we have gotten a lot better in a lot of arenas. I think that a lot of schools have really stepped up to the plate when they've been presented with these issues. We've seen it as early as elementary schools, schools changing things in their school to make it to accommodate a singular student, and I think that is great. I think that what we need to do is we need to look at, is that the norm? There are always going to be situations where schools step up to the plate to accommodate a single student, but how can we do that before that ever happens? How can we make it so a student doesn't have to go through the extra stress of asking for a gender-inclusive bathroom? So I think that we have a long way to go, and it's going to come not just in making sure that all schools are designed for all students in that sense, but that our framework is shifted to say, this isn't a question. We're going to have bathrooms that are gender-inclusive. We're not going to make people gender themselves on this arbitrary binary.